Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with my friend Brian Chau. You might know him from the New World podcast and Substack. We've had some conversations. He's doing something new now besides writing. He's founded a think tank called the Alliance for the Future. So, Brian, welcome. Tell me about this and what exactly you're going to be doing in DC from now on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, finally making the transition from online writing to, actually doing something. So, this is something I noticed the last time I was in DC. Uh, People in general, and especially lawmakers, have a very low resolution understanding of machine learning. They'll think of it
Mm.
as, just ChatGPT, and they won't even have a good idea about what ChatGPT is, how it works, or not even any of the technical stuff, but just what it's like to use ChatGPT. Like they haven't used it that much at all.
Mm.
And this leads to an environment that is sort of really based off of sentiments, really based off of assumptions, for better or worse. Right? This includes some people who would agree with my policy prescriptions. But at the end of the day, I think that policy should be made based on reality, based on how people are actually using machine learning on the day to day, and just giving lawmakers and staff a very basic understanding of that is our goal here. And right now, from all of the conversations I've had, from finding as many people to work together with as possible, there's just a very stunningly few people with any sort of technical knowledge and a basis in reality, and that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, it's a 501c4. That means you can influence policy, right? That's your hope.
Yeah, that is precisely the goal. If we
Mm.
influence no policy, well, it depends what policy there is to influence, right? Um, but if we have no influence, then I would say that's not a great time.
Yeah, right. So you're gonna be like living in DC,
Yeah, I
right?
just made the move from around a month ago.
And what's your daily basis? What's your work gonna be on a daily basis?
So far, it's been a lot of meetings, a lot of the arguments, the announcements, the policy proposals, the descriptions and explainers. I spent basically 2 years writing, right? Not all of it was about machine learning, certainly, but those technical arguments were already out there. So this week, it's been a lot of organizational stuff, and the last few weeks as well. Meeting with people, doing pretty basic logistics, setting up group chats, setting up all of the coordination we need to actually run Alliance for the Future and to fundraise and so on and so forth. So that's what my work looks like right now. In the future, what we're looking at is hosting more events, coordinating with staff, coordinating to try to testify in front of Congress, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And so are policymakers in Washington, are they sort of receptive? Do you find them that they're looking for enlightenment, or are they, not really?
Yeah, so mostly it's through staff. It's very hard, especially as a starting organization, to directly talk to any elected representatives. But yeah, the staff are very receptive. They see AI, especially in the current cycle. They see AI in the headlines. This is something that they want to do something about. They want to learn about, that they see as something that could really have a high potential in the future. So I think we've started at a good time.
Yeah, that's great. Are you so people know where you are sort of in the intellectual landscape. The Alliance for the Future is bullish on AI. You do not worry about the alignment problem. You do not think it's going to kill us all. You want the
Yeah, so
technology
many
to
of these projections are just based on a complete detachment from reality.
Mm.
I heard Robin Hanson put it greatly on a podcast before, that people see the exponential increase in abilities, but don't see the exponential increase in difficulty. And every field is like this. You invent better tools for observing particles in physics, for example. You invent ever better tools. Sure, you get more precise measurements, but then the problems get harder. And now we're stuck on string theory. And in fact, you see this in literally every field across history. And this idea, this kind of like blindness, it's like a 3-year-old learning how to do addition. I don't know if 3-year-olds learn addition. Maybe it's like a 6-year-old. 6-year-old learns addition. And he just thinks to himself, you're just adding numbers. They just keep on getting bigger. It will never stop. And then maybe they turn a year older and they learn how to subtract. This is the phase between the 3-year the 6-year-old and the 7-year-old. It's just so silly.
Yeah. So yeah. So in theory, you believe that AI. So this is against the recursive improvement, right? That's the thing. It's like the machine will be so smart, it'll just start fiddling with its machinery or its algorithm. All the arguments. They'll say, well, it can do a zillion simulations in a second. Well, it can. It's costless to change its code. Well, it can experiment, right? You're going to hear all these things about recursive improvement. And so, what's the answer to that?
It's just not based in reality, right? It's like what's the answer to the assertion that the sun is blue, right? Like
No, it's
all
not.
of these
That's yeah.
algorithmic processes are are similarity comparisons. They're not extrapolating out far into the distance. And when you have people don't understand this, people are kind of using preconceptions either from science fiction or from essentially like blog posts, fan fiction written 20 years ago based on understandings of machine learning that are completely different from the algorithms that are used today. Um, the transformer architecture, which is currently the most popular, and also all of the alternatives that people are going to use to replace them, whether it's a mixture of experts, whether it's state space models and so on, all have this property that what they're measuring is similarity to some group of people, right? So if you're a top scientist, for example, you can have more top scientists. That's the idea, at least, or at least free up more of their time. But the idea that this is something that is going to, scale indefinitely is simply absurd. It's just not based in any form of reality.
Mhm. And it won't scale indefinitely because you said something specific about the technology, the way the LLMs worked out, rather than what people were imagining was going to come before.
Both because of the existing algorithms, and some people argue that both people who are kind of on the doomer side, people who are more sane, argue that we're going to have to switch to different algorithms. Jan LeCun was arguing this the other day, and I think that he's correct. Eventually, people will have to make a breakthrough, or maybe overcome a kind of political consensus or a kind of social consensus. As the saying goes, science progresses funeral by funeral. But certainly, if you believe in the far future that people are going to switch off of these similarity based models, maybe go to something more like tree search algorithms, then sure. But that
Mhm.
has very little evidence for occurring in the short to medium term, and you would actually have to make the affirmative argument for that rather than just conjecturing that the existing ways will
Okay,
get you
yeah,
there.
you're speaking at a very high level. You're a computer scientist, and so many people aren't going to know what you're talking about. So you're saying it's the specifics, the LLM, there's similarity models, and
Right,
that you're
right. But
just
I think that
taking.
many people
Yeah.
get the intuition, right? Many people, it's sort of like the midwit thing, except it's not even like most people, right? It's specifically like word cells. So normal people who go with common sense, they've looked at history, or at least a very elementary reading of history. They know that physics didn't go on forever. They knew that we got stuck at string theory, and it's the same is true for every other company. The chemicals industry, right? Maybe there's some regulatory problems there, but fundamentally, the problems got harder. And you can look across
Yeah, but
essentially
people say
every
the
single
intelligence
field.
gets. People say the intelligence gets. The chemicals don't help you consciously make more chemicals. The intelligence can help you make more. The intelligence is what makes the intelligence, right? So that's the logic. Programmers are going to become a lot more productive. They're going to become a lot better,
Right, but that's
presumably
that
eventually.
that is actually true for physics and for chemistry and so on. People develop tools, people develop time saves, right? If people were using, the physical models and the physical kind of measurement tools
Hmm.
from like the 1800s, they'd make no progress.
Yeah. So it's
And
inherently.
on the specific question of intelligence, this is something that is based on a really a misnomer. it is this sort of word cell thing where they take two terms, conflate them, and that's where they draw their conclusion. What's fundamentally happening here is that there's two kinds of processes that people ascribe the word intelligence to.
Hmm.
One is this kind of process of novel discovery, this process of um, this process of deduction, and then the other is this process of essentially like scaling of uh of definite. You've probably heard of Thiel's definite and indefinite optimism. It's very similar to that, where people see tools that speed up the translation of ideas as ideas themselves, and
Hmm.
this on the kind of very elementary level, like just because you've changed a sentence from French to English doesn't give you new ideas. That's a very, very simple kind of uh, overstatement, but people do
Yeah.
not understand that this kind of translation of old material into new
Yeah.
material is
Yeah.
it's not science, or like
Right.
it's nothing but a
So
tool
the learned
for
language
human expression.
model is just, I mean, fundamentally, it's just, you ever see there was a South Park episode where they're making fun of Family Guy and they have the seals and the seals are like putting random things together and making Family Guy cutaways because the Family Guy cutaways are just a bunch of random nonsense. It's like, it's like Sex in the City, nuclear war, Brezhnev, and then they'll make like a cutaway of that, and then they'll be like the South Park is like, this is all that Family Guy is doing, right? And this is all that this is sort of what the LLM is doing, right? It's taking these words. It's like if I say Brian Chu, I will say the next word will be is, and the next word will be that. And they're not making, is that the idea that you're just basically moving words around based on predictions of previous words? And this is fundamentally different than what you are doing or what I'm doing when we're, say, writing an essay?
uh, I don't think all essays are original. Not
Mhm.
all essays
Yeah, some of
are
them are
introducing
people
new
just putting
ideas,
words
right?
together, right? Yeah.
Um, so I would say that people uh, people attribute intelligence to like more things than they should, or people have a conflation, right? All I'm asking for is not to conflate these two terms, right? When someone creates uh, this these very divergent theories, right? This kind of goes back to really the philosophy of startups. When people create these divergent, consensus challenging ideas, they're not doing the same thing as when they're repackaging an essay of maybe one or two different people's writing. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so the LLM is just repackaging. You reject the premise that it is like intelligence. So what's intelligence? Just a human and a human who can
Well,
produce.
people use like IQ tests as an example, right? I think
Mm.
that uh, this is the problem with the conflation, and the conflation is not just it's not just doomers. There are many kind of normie people who make this conflation, right? The kind of recombination tasks, right? That you might see in an IQ test, like the Raven matrices, right? A very common kind of grid based IQ test. That is one thing that we mean when we say intelligence, but we also mean the ability to create new ideas. And I don't want to pretend like this is just the doomers who are doing this. In fact, maybe they're downstream of other people. They're downstream of other people's mistakes. But the idea that you're going to take over the world is kind of like political, strategic thing, or as opposed to like do like reasonably well to like some sample of humans that have like uh have high performances on IQ tests. They're just not the same. And you see this in the real world as well. We're not ruled by Terrence Tao. We're not in the Terrence Tao dictatorship.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there's two questions sort of that the doomers present. There is like the idea of whether, and this is what you're focusing on, whether the specific technology is there. And the question of whether, we'll get there and then we'll all going to die because we're going to have an alignment problem of this intelligence that we're not going to understand. So I understand your first position. The technology is just not there. It's not going to be there for a while. Do you disagree in principle that if that something like a Yudkowsky sort of fanfic could potentially happen if we have another model or another way of building intelligence?
Even if you have another way of developing intelligence, you it's still an engineering problem. You still have to basically. I reject the premise that there's some secret sauce where we get infinite scaling. It's just not true. So you look at both. I talked just now about the kind of data constraints, the kind of similarity constraints, but there's another objection that's raised by the doomers, which is that what if scale is all you need? What if having someone who is similar to, let's say, top 1% of people, but is able to kind of repeat things at 1,000 times the time, right? Generate that kind of interpolation,
Yeah.
but that if you just have much more time, much more content with that same level of ability, then that will take over the world. Um, Very simply put, that is not something you can actually do based on the existing resources. There is this secondary idea that really is not just the doomers, but very common idea in Silicon Valley, and helps their marketing, that when a field invests in companies, that this turns into kind of underlying scientific innovation. And the causation is often backwards, but the thing that you see in history is that actually many times after these technologies are scaled, they they cease to improve. Now, this isn't necessarily because they were funded. Maybe it was funded, most likely it was funded because they saw a dramatic increase in improvement, and then it kind of reverted to the mean. So you see this most famously with Google. PageRank did not significantly improve, even with the application of some machine learning technologies, and arguably it's gotten worse, mostly because people are doing SEO optimization, not because Google kind of made it worse. But although there are some claims of that as well. But you see this not just with Google, you see this with many of the tech giants in the past decade. You see this going back throughout history, chemical companies, drug companies, the famous Eroom's law, the backwards Moore's law. Although that also has to do with regulation. You see this with US Steel, right? Just think to yourself, like, how much did US Steel becoming essentially a monopoly, becoming an immensely successful company, translate back into scientific development? So these people will make the case, which is completely detached from reality, that investment in machine learning will suddenly create this explosion of technological improvement, of improvement of the underlying way we do machine learning, and it lead to this discovery of these new models, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. And I would just say, first of all, the affirmative case should be on them, provide any kind of evidence for their claims, and they never do. And then, secondly, there's not just no evidence for their claims, but there is active evidence against their claims, which is the historical precedent of essentially every company in the long run.
Yeah, I mean that's one way to frame it. You could have. So I want to go back to something you said, where you said, "Oh, you'll just have like a smart person at the 99th percentile. They'll be able to think faster." So like, yeah, you'll hear these things. Like I heard Sam Harris would say, like, you are like, if you just had the memory of a computer and the processing speed of a computer, just you or me as a human had the processing speed of a computer, and we're a fairly intelligent person to begin with, we'd be superhuman. And that's all. Like, he made it sound like it was so easy to imagine. Like, you just that. Do you think that there's some kind of like fundamental trade off here, but like to think as well as like a human does, like a really smart human, versus like doing it fast? Is there some kind of fundamental trade-off here, or do we not know, or what? Like, how do you answer that thing? What if we just made you, Brian Chu, 1,000 times faster?
Right. So that requires some kind of resource input, right? The main problem here is that people assume that this is going to happen for free, that you're just going to get indefinite scaling. Right now, the problem poses itself in two ways. One is resource constraints, something like data, something like compute, and two is just even if you have enough compute, can you actually get there? Can you actually get these kind of uh, complex systems of thoughts to work, right? So
Yeah,
we
but
see
look at how
that.
dumb we are, and we don't use that many resources. We're just a human. We eat a lot of food. Um, just we have something in our brains. We have some kind of way of interacting with the world that makes us very smart. And the
Yeah,
idea
for sure.
is,
So there are these, people. This is a pushback on the kind of acceleration argument that I don't think is that I don't think is, it's not correct for the right reasons, basically. That they'll say, there's something fundamental about being human or something fundamental about biology. I don't think that that's true at all. It's more like you actually have to understand the underlying. People like to take these shortcuts, right? People like to take these categories, or they like to take these broad generalizations, or they like to conflate terms and say, oh, this is where I'm going to plant my flag. I'm going to say that this category is either, guaranteed or impossible. And really, you have to say it depends on the underlying technology. So, on the underlying technology, when it comes to these sort of inference models, when it comes to transformers, for example, I would say that the constraint is with that technology that it makes it difficult for that to occur. Whereas, you could theoretically invent some kind of much better algorithm. There's two parts to this, right? There's looking at the underlying algorithms that exist and looking at the probability that a new algorithm is invented. So that's where I think that comes. Those arguments are put together. Now, some people who maybe agree with my end position, who I think are not coming at it from a kind of reality-based approach, is that they will say, this is something fundamental about being human. This is something essential. And what is the argument for that? Well, one argument might just be, well, humans can do it now; they won't do it in the future. Uh, and that is something that might be based on an eventual claim, right? That might be something that like turns out to be true at the end of the day, but doesn't really investigate like why that's happening, right? So I
Mm.
think that it lacks the right it lacks the right reasoning, right? If you actually try to inspect the internal argument, it's not so good, but ultimately it might be correct kind of by accident.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. What's a transformer?
Right. So transformer is essentially the way we do machine learning for large language models right now. So something like ChatGPT, something like Anthropic's Claude, something like Google Gemini, all of these are based off of like slight variations of the transformer model.
Okay, so it's a
So
model. It's not a machine. It's not like a chip.
yeah, it's not like it's not the power transformers, right? It's not like we're just taking the box off of the electricity poles, and then
Mm.
that's what we're
But this
running our
uses a
machine
lot
learning
of physical
algorithms
resources.
on.
You mentioned resources. I saw some headline that ChatGPT uses like a huge portion of American energy consumption. Is that right?
So
Not a huge portion, but like way disproportionate
yeah,
to what it does.
um, this was very funny. I think this might have been something that I quote tweeted, which is yeah, some journalist said like it uses the equivalent of like 17,000 homes, and I just
Mm.
said like so approximately like 0.02% of the energy per user.
Yeah.
Uh, or per capita or whatever, right? So there will always be these headlines. There was these headlines with crypto that look how many millions of how much energy they're using, right? Uh, and that just comes with scale. Like if you serve a million users, or
Yeah.
if you serve 100 million users, right? In the case of ChatGPT, that's going to use a lot of energy.
Okay,
You're
so
doing 100 million
that's
of
not where
something.
that's not what. But you mentioned so that's not the resource constraint. It's not the little literal energy, the electricity that
Yeah,
you use.
right now the energy is not a big deal. It's more
Yeah.
so hardware. There's just a limited amount of chips, especially specialized chips in the world, and some people are trying to fix that with policy. Right now, or in the future, people speculate that data will become more of a constraint as you're able to essentially run models that are able to process data more without using as many resources, or you'll simply have the resources to process that amount of data that'll become a constraint. And then a third thing that might arise with regards to energy is that as these chips become more time efficient, there's a trade-off in design there where they'll use maybe a similar amount of energy while becoming more time efficient until eventually energy becomes more of a constraint, and then you'll have to optimize for that in the design process as well.
Mm. So what kind of so the is it's the what's stopping us potentially is like just the number of chips and what there's just not enough of these silicon wafers. They're just TSMC. There's only one of them. Is that why? Is that going to prevent sort of the artificial intelligence from taking off?
Yeah. On one hand, there's two ways to look at this,
Mm,
right? Um, you say prevent like it's otherwise an inevitable thing, and that's exactly the framing that I
mm,
really despise. It's sort of this kind of like inevitability argument is just very silly because it reverses the null hypothesis. It's ahistorical. It's something that's only believed by people who are just not attached to
So your
reality,
so
who don't
your
feel
view
any
your
kind of
view is
evidence.
we have this level of ChatGPT. It can write a Wikipedia page, or it can give me a third grade book report or a college report or
Mhm.
something ideas. And your basic and we have DALL-E and we have these things. Your basic assumption is like we should not expect tons of like because everyone you talk to is like just imagine a year. I had Rocco Almijek on last week on my podcast, and he
Yeah,
was just like,
Rocco's a little bit more stable than some of these other folks. What I would
yeah,
say is that people assume um, people assume that there's not much difference. I saw this graph. This is like such an stupid, and it's literally like a made up graph,
mm-hmm,
right? It's not indicating any sort of real data.
mm-hmm,
Going around where people are saying, people put like Einstein and like the average human like very
yeah,
close together. It's like you're just an idiot if you think that.
yeah,
They're not
yeah.
like you're,
Well,
and
compared
people
to the
even like the
AI
more
coming, yeah,
extreme, yeah,
yeah,
even more like the more extreme comparison of saying like, oh, Einstein is like less different than like the average human, uh, less different in terms of understanding of the world than like the average human, as the average human is to like a monkey, and that's
yeah.
just not true, right? There's just not that much understanding that was developed by the time like the average human rolled around. When people develop more. And people will have like very spurious measures of this, right? They'll use like the total number of like neurons or something,
But you
and
think the distance between Einstein delta and human is bigger than the human and the ape? Is that what you're saying?
yes, of
Yes.
course, of
Okay, that's it. I
course.
love it. I
If
love it. I
you're
sort of think that
understanding,
too. Yeah,
if you are understanding a physical model of the world, that's something that,
yeah,
to a very granular level, and not just
yeah,
understanding it, but developing this new
yeah,
system, right?
yeah.
This is something that the average
Yeah.
human is not
They
going
can't
to
even
be able to
understand what
do. Not
Einstein
even
did. Yeah,
close.
they can't even get the concept of. You can't even explain to them theory of relativity in a dumb way. You're right. I like this. This is so anti-egalitarian. This is so anti-egalitarian.
Right, right. This is one of the other assumptions, right? I saw this other post. It's just idiotic. Of like, the train will not stop at human station. That's their model. It's like, what is human station exactly, right?
Mm,
Well, what is it that's so similar? And this is one thing that they kind of create a circular argument around, because they'll say there's not that much of a neuron difference. There's not that much of a total neuron difference between Einstein and the average human, and then they'll say, therefore, as we're like increasing the total amount of operations, which they kind of analogize. Even this comparison is kind of silly, but
yeah.
let's take the assumption that you can analogize, compute operations in a machine learning network to the neural difference. Really, what that should tell you is that their assumption is wrong. Because they're saying, look, there's not that much difference between the neural, the number of neurons in the average human and Einstein, right? And they're saying, therefore, changing the number of neurons by a little bit will get you from a human to Einstein.
Yeah.
Whereas, that should be a proof by contradiction. That should tell you that, this assumption that the neurons are what matters is just stupid.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean the argument here I is that yeah, there's such a big like even so maybe ChatGPT is as smart as a average college student. Like I buy that. Like the average college student couldn't
So,
write as good as
so this is
yeah.
something that's interesting. They gave some form of IQ test to all of these models,
Yeah.
and once again, there's huge variation in abilities. IQ tests are not indicative of a machine learning model's ability to generalize to other human tasks, so on and so forth. All caveats aside, someone
Mm.
did this experiment, and I think like Claude Opus had like 101 IQ, and then on this test, and then ChatGPT or GPT-4 had I think like 80, 85 or 86, and then the rest were below that.
Mhm. So they went backward. They went backwards. It was the first one with the 101 before ChatGPT. Was ChatGPT supposed to be an improvement?
No. So Claude Opus is the model by Anthropic. It's a different
Ah,
company.
okay. So these
Yeah.
guys, so they're at 100 in IQ test. Oh, that might. Are they trained on IQ tests? Like,
I don't I don't know about Claude Opus.
yeah,
I think there was an article uh, where OpenAI did a similar experiment, and they were talking about a specific genre of IQ tests that they had removed from their sample. Maybe there were some other IQ tests in the sample. None of
mm,
this is public,
yeah,
but they
yeah,
said on like some other post that they did an IQ test that was not in the sample, and then they got some results.
yeah. So yeah, they passed the LSAT, they passed the MCAT, and um, yeah, that's interesting. So
Yeah, these kind of like knowledge lookup tests, they seem to be
yeah,
better at.
so you think yeah,
This is
getting
a kind of asymmetry.
right. So getting to 100, I mean, maybe we're there, arguably, but you're saying to get to 140, like these are gaps. These are not, these are step, 120, 140. These are completely different things. And you think that because we got to 100 now or 102 or whatever, um, we shouldn't think that like getting to 103, we shouldn't see getting
Yeah,
to 140
especially
and
because
as
the
like getting
quantity of data available is an uneven distribution, right?
they had
So
to they had to
even
eat the
if you're
whole
taking
internet, all the text in the world. They had to eat, right, basically, to do this, or a
yeah
lot of it.
yeah not all information is public, but we're talking about um yeah we're talking about like large fractions of the internet.
Yeah, yeah. And so you needed that. And is there anything like have there been serious developments as far as the underlying algorithm, or is it just been eating more and more data?
There's like there are some things that are like quote unquote promising, and how they measure that is that they essentially take existing they take unoptimized versions of the existing models. So the transformer architecture, right? They take a transformer and they say, essentially they try to set up a fair fight. So what I mean by fair fight is that there are all of these very specific kind of engineering or like slight adjustments that people make to the transformer model in order to make it slightly more efficient. Uh, Both in kind of in conjunction with the underlying hardware, uh, in the way that they actually implement the operations of that model in a way that's particularly fast given the underlying hardware, so on and so forth. And they say, okay, let's take these micro optimizations out. Let's just try to give, once again, a quote unquote fair fight between this model, this unoptimized version of a transformer, and this new alternative. And they found that the new alternative can beat the kind of fair fight version of the transformer slightly. And I should say that many of these, I was talking about earlier about these kind of fundamental constraints based on like similarity and based on kind of next token prediction. All all of those apply to like the major competitors that we're seeing, whether it's switch transformers, whether it's state space models. Um, those constraints are also true of those alternatives. They're not kind of huge leaps in kind of a completely different crazy direction. They're restructurings that are promising. I want to be optimistic about this. I want to be optimistic about the good
Yeah,
people who are doing research on this. But like I said right at the beginning, like I quoted from Robin Hanson, you shouldn't expect the problems to remain just as easy as you're getting better at them.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. This I think you're right. I mean, this you pointed out this has been sort of a pessimistic conversation just about how much sort of sounds like it's just about how AI doesn't work, but really we're just arguing with the people who think it's going to have an IQ of a million and enslave us in like 2 years, right? And so
Yeah,
that's why, from
exactly. And
that
and I think
perspective,
it's a
AI
reason
is
it's a reason to be optimistic about AI, because at the end of the day, AI is a tool. That tool is getting a lot more useful. And I use it every day. I use it to generate a lot of the graphics that I use in the think tank. I use it to generate um, just a lot of resources in general. To This is something that I've been doing, and I found that Claude was much better at than GPT-4 is kind of translating. So I have a lot of articles written from a kind of journalistic tone, to put it bluntly, kind of optimized for clicks and optimized for subscriptions and so on, that I want to rewrite in a think tank style to be much more neutral, to try to stay less into controversy and focus more on the technical aspects and
Hmm.
where it's relevant for policymakers. And doing this kind of translation, doing this kind of change in tone is something that's very useful, right? And that's something that, once again, you're using AI as a tool for.
Yeah. So I had a paper where I did some text analysis of when I was doing academic work. Some text analysis of some UN resolutions. It used the latent Dirichlet allocation. You know, this kind of method of like predicting words. It classifies words based
Sorry,
on.
say that again.
It's called latent Dirichlet allocation. Do you know this kind of algorithm? Anyway, it's not important if you don't if it's not important. It's um,
Yeah,
but
I'm just trying to remember because I see these things pass by. Um,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
So it's related to so the LLM. Because of my little bit of background in this, I think I sort of get how the LLMs work. How does the Dolly? How do these picture stuff work? Because you're not just predicting the next thing. What are you doing when you're making a video or a picture with AI?
So we have a lot less visibility, essentially, into how DALL-E works. There was a kind of more recent breakthrough with diffusion models, which is what stable diffusion is. It's in the name, where they kind of break down the images in a more in an increasingly more kind of granular level, right? They'll have essentially what a version of the image that they generate that has much broader strokes, and then they'll kind of go in on details on each part and so on, and that's how they represent it in the network. Um, but on DALL-E, I think there's so I've focused less on this because quite frankly because it's kind of no one is arguing that DALL-E is the part that's
Really?
going to
Because
take over
Dolly
the
seems to
world.
me a lot more impressive. Dolly seems to, I don't know anything about this, but Dolly to me, making a video or a movie seems a lot more impressive than
Yeah, it's impressive
putting in a
from a
bunch of
kind of
words.
useful, from a kind of utility perspective, right? That it's a very powerful tool, and I agree. I am impressed by it. I'm very happy. I'm happy to pay $20 a month for it. You know, and
Right.
you're in the situation where, yeah, there in fact, you're right that there's sort of an excessive focus on the language models, especially on these kind of online debates. But yeah, the
I'm not
Dolly,
saying that
if
necessarily,
you're
but
kind of returned to sanity, right? If you're returned to sanity and you're looking at all of these from a kind of economic perspective, yeah, it might as well be. It may very
no,
well
no,
be that Dolly is a more
I'm
powerful
interested in
tool.
the conceptual core of this. The fact that a computer to me, like, so you'd have to know something about the underlying technology and sort of how fundamental is what it's doing. But to me, just just not about, I'm not thinking about the economic impact or whatever, but just to be taking a bunch of words, moving them around, predicting them, is one thing. uh Making a picture, like drawing it, like that seems to me insane. That boggles my mind. But you're telling me for some reason that people, like the people who think that AI is going to kill us all, they're more impressed with LLM. And is that true? And if so, is there some conceptual core to the LLM that makes it potentially more likely to foam than Dolly is, to be more likely to blow up?
I mean, that's their perspective. Yeah. Some there's some noise around like around the new video model Sora that I think OpenAI had this blog called like visual video models as physics engines or something like that, where they say it gives it an understanding of like physics.
Mm.
Um, I think that if I were to kind of play the doomer and try to steelman their argument, they would say that the language model is more threatening because it shows more ability to plan, right? An image is not necessarily a kind of sequence of actions that you would take to take over the world. Like if you ask an LLM, like give me like a non RLH, maybe the RLHF makes doesn't answer, but if it's not RLHF to refuse to answer, then it might go basically like here are some steps that you would take towards taking over the world, and of course they wouldn't work,
Hmm.
but it shows more evidence of like quote unquote planning.
Show you pictures of how to yeah, take over. I mean, DALL-E, it's really weird. It's like, draw a baseball bat with the name Richard on it, and like it just doesn't get it. Like you think like a
Yeah.
person would get it. It draws like an R and like an X and like a symbol, and it's like, what is going on in this thing, right? And I'm like in the wrong places.
Have you seen the one where they try to get get it to spell? No, this is ChatGPT, I think, that they try to get it to spell Honda in like ASCII characters.
What is ASCII characters?
Basically, like those early internet like designs where they use like the text characters to make art. Do you know what I
Okay.
talk about?
Well,
Kind
no,
of like
but I
emojis.
guess it doesn't matter. Yeah. So what happens?
Uh, Basically, it's very hard to get it to spell out Honda. They eventually do it, but like very painstakingly, like one letter at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you believe that they're justified in being more interested in LLM as a fundamental technology of intelligence than DALL-E, or do you think that that's just them being irrational?
I think that their entire model of technological development is wrong.
Mm,
Maybe it's like slightly less wrong, but it's just moving deck chairs on the Titanic, right?
yeah.
It's going to be wrong either way. Maybe it's like more obviously wrong. Like I kind of um, at this point, I think like every doomer they bring to every doomer argument that they actually like try to make in front of like normies or in front of like lawmakers is like a net benefit to me. But like I'd especially like to see one that's like based off of DALL-E. So most of the time, like these doomer organizations will send people to like complain about deepfakes and stuff. And there are like honestly like the deepfake concerns I take more seriously, and they're resolved through normal law enforcement, right?
Mm,
But if they gave their honest, actual, internet arguments. That's the thing with me. I don't need to give a different argument for the internet as opposed to for like normal people. It's the same. It's the same argument. It's not. It's not hard to understand at all. Maybe once I get to some of the technical reasons why they're wrong, it's harder to understand. But the kind of
mm,
broad strokes idea is the same. They have to like they have to pretend they're like very concerned about like misinformation or racism or automation.
mm, yeah.
They're just so much more dishonest. And maybe if I had to be more dishonest, I really don't think I could bring myself to it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But like you can imagine a world where like there are actually like other technologies that I think it's like harder to make the case to the public for. Bitcoin is one example, right? Or like crypto in general. It's kind of like not obvious to most normal people that like Bitcoin is a net good. Even if I do think Bitcoin is a net good, I'm not sure the same arguments from an intellectual level would work on a political level. But when the benefits are just so overwhelmingly positive, like AI,
Mm,
and where the concerns, I mean, like some of the normie concerns, I actually do like think that
yeah.
you need to take effort to
Yeah.
learn and understand their
Scammers. Yeah.
concerns very well. You want
Do you
to
think
like
AI alignment
write
is
good
worth working on at
policy.
all? Like, do you
Sorry.
think Leon Aschenbrenner? I don't know if you've seen his work, but
Yeah,
he's.
I met him. We all met
Oh
at
yeah, yeah, that's
Emergent
right.
Ventures. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I mean, I don't think like the motivation is right. I think that kind of experiments on trying to understand the underlying technology better is probably a net good, right? Maybe it's like an opportunity cost, right? Maybe if you were just doing he just joined some other team, that would actually be
Yeah.
better. But in terms of like these things aren't hurting anyone, right?
Mm,
If you're just conducting experiments on kind
mm.
of getting
Yeah.
these like chatbots to
Is he
instruct
helping?
each other.
He's a smart guy. Opportunity cost for him and people like him is pretty big. Is he helping? You think? Do you think it's worth hedging in case Eliza is actually a prophet? No, or not.
No, like in this kind of time frame, no. In like the far future, like many
Mm,
many iterations of kind of scientific progress, really like Max Weber says, like the slow boring of politics. I think science can be similar,
mm,
especially kind of like developed established science, which we see in most other
yeah.
fields, right? You know about this, you're in academia.
Yeah.
um
I think Leopold would say,
After basically like after a few cycles of AI winter, and then we get to the next thing, and then we get to the next thing again, and so on and so forth. Um, that could be something that becomes useful, but or even just as a kind of systems engineering thing in the present. There are some applications of it, right? If you just want a kind of low compute layer supervising a high compute layer for some reason, I could see, organizational reasons why you would want that, or just kind of like practical resource constraints. But in terms of like the doomer scenario, it's just this is the thing that I realized that, like the more I looked into it, that usually when you're looking into politics, you get a respect for people as you really go into their arguments. I think especially in the case of these kind of like moral fights, right? As you go more into the philosophical understanding of it. Maybe not for you actually. Maybe you just start to hate these people.
no, I start to
But
hate
but
them.
you
Yeah, I don't. No, my view is the more I look into most people's political views, I would have thought for you too. The more I'm like, no, there's not much at
I
the
don't
core
know.
here.
It's like they start with some axioms. I don't really blame people for being emotional. Especially if they're like kind of honest about it. You just gain an understanding. No, not necessarily that you think they're like, oh, they're like suddenly savants, that they're
Mm.
suddenly geniuses. But I think you get to the kind of base like emotional core of a lot of people's political preferences.
Yeah,
Maybe I still think that they're wrong on some of the facts, but you kind
having
of
an
get the
emotional
motivational
core,
story there.
that's driving everything is not to me admirable. I agree. There's emotional core. There could be an
Yeah.
intellectual
This
core.
doesn't mean that I think they're like right about reality, but you at least kind of get how the logic works,
Okay.
right? The doomers are just like the more you kind of look into their logic, and like how they try to like connect one argument into to another, the more you realize that it's this sort of cargo cult that they just love. This is something that like really just really grinds my gears, is that they just love analogies. They hate getting to the actual definition. They hate discussing the underlying thing. They're always like, oh, do you want to talk about like evolution as an analogy? Oh, do you want to talk about like the fucking paperclip optimizer, something that's based off of an understanding of machine learning that's far outdated, that's very distant, that is like completely ignorant of modern kind of customization techniques, RLHF, SBT, so on, right? It, or even worse, like oh, imagine if you just had like smarter aliens. Like this is already making an assertion that is just
Yeah.
false. And this is the pattern, right? The pattern is like, make an obviously false comparison, draw a correct conclusion about the thing you made a false comparison to, and then like proudly proclaim that you've solved the original problem. Anytime you hear anyone try to like throw an analogy at you like that, as if it's like actual evidence, not as in something that is giving you the outline of a future argument, but as an argument in and of itself, right?
Mm.
That is something you should be highly suspicious of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. The so yeah, I mean, we talked about AI. It's going to do cool things. I'm with you on. I don't know. I think we might have. You've moved me a bit here. The I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah, and I should say I'm optimistic about the economic effects. I think
Yeah,
everyone's lives, or,
yeah,
or at least almost
yeah.
everyone's lives, are going to
And the
be much
standard
better.
arguments against like the other things, like racism, automation. These are all those stupid arguments. Racism and it's going to take our jobs is always a bad argument, right? But these are
Yeah,
the
the
things.
automation thing is interesting because it is sort of a cost and benefit thing, right? You can find like one person, you can find like a specific person who was made worse off by the Industrial Revolution, sure,
Yeah, this is
but
Ludditism. It's the simple argument against Ludditism, against all
yeah,
kinds of
yeah, but in the
protectionism.
context of like politics, what I would say is like, just line up the votes, count the votes. Way more people will be benefiting from AI. We already have 100 million users on of ChatGPT, right? This is going to be a real constituency. It's going to be like banning the mobile phone.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And so the politics of this might be a question of whether your thing is necessary. I my pol my understanding of politics puts a lot of stock in inertia. both of my books really are about inertia, about American foreign policy, and then about sort of the civil rights regime, about inertia, and just sort of developments in a slow and sort of unpredictable ways. Um, the you take this view seriously that it's an optimistic story for AI because software has traditionally not been regulated. It's sort of hard to regulate, and there's not
Yeah,
like a
exactly.
nuclear regulatory commission. So I always assume that we're not going to do anything on AI. Like where it's probably like we're just gonna the regulations are gonna remain half-hearted. Even with like there's bunch of TikTok they might actually ban or force a sale, but like they haven't done anything that much to social media.
Yeah,
Social
but
media is
and
still
that's
pretty
not
much free.
related to AI. That's related to Chinese ownership.
No, no, yeah,
Like
I'm
they're
not
fine
making
with
it
like Instagram
right.
Reels.
Exactly what I'm saying. So I'm making yeah, I'm saying like we have this long held sort of thing where practice where government doesn't really regulate software, and that includes social media. And so like, are there reasons to be worried that we'll strangle AI?
Yeah, there's three main reasons.
Hmm.
One is the kind of politics of emergency. You saw this with COVID. You
Hmm.
saw
Yeah.
basically how much the Constitution doesn't matter if all of the people agree the Constitution doesn't matter.
Hmm.
This is what I hear from a lot of people here that and I agree with them to a large extent that code is speech. Imagine banning code, like that would be insane. There's a agency right now that's trying to the NTIA, I forget what it's called. This is something that I'm working on right now. That's trying to get comment on whether they should ban open source models. And
Hmm.
there are serious, very, very well funded, basically like doomer organizations that are trying to push this through. Now, at the end of the day, there is a very real possibility that they try to do this, that it goes to the Supreme Court. They say no, this is an obvious violation of the First Amendment, and then on that specific threat, we're safe.
Yeah.
Is that guaranteed? Uh, I would say that it's actually not guaranteed, and I would look at both COVID as a precedent, and also some of the stuff you write in your book, right? The origins of woke. That there was originally an understanding of civil rights, that it was going to be, we weren't going to, we weren't going to discriminate against whites or against other groups, and then this just got completely ignored.
Hmm.
And I think that it's with something like the First Amendment, where there is a long held precedent. I do think that this will be one of the more difficult, or some of the kind of like more tail end threats, right? Well, how I would look at it is that there's sort of a distribution where this is one of the most dangerous threats, right? I think that if this is approved, that you essentially don't live in a free country anymore, you don't have the First Amendment anymore. But it's also, for that same reason, actually, it's also very difficult because it would require going through the politics of emergency and getting enough people to agree that you should
Hmm.
overturn the First Amendment, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you said three reasons, didn't you? That this might be
Yeah,
different.
yeah. So that's one. Number two is the kind of normal political concerns. I think that the normal political concerns actually matter. And quite frankly, if I'm talking about people speaking in front of Congress, if I'm talking about people who are having direct interactions with policymakers, that's a much more immediate threat, because they will look at some of these models and they will essentially try to try to get them to agree with their pre-existing ideology, whether it's something like race or disinformation, so on, kind of like the grab bag of existing political interests. And I actually documented this already affecting existing language models, because Google published a paper on Gemini, part of which describes how they went through like the quote unquote fine tuning. This is the ideological biasing that I reported out, that I think you've talked about on Twitter, that essentially, many people have seen this, that caused it to eventually refuse to generate images of white people, to otherwise, in the kind of text version of Gemini, when you're asking it questions, have a very kind of, left wing ideology. This was done through a secondary training process. And at the end of this training process, or at the end of the paper describing this training process, they say, the responsible AI safety team, or the responsible AI team, was put together according to the recommendations of the Biden executive order and the UK government declaration. And so you already see this kind of sub-legal government policy, right? This is something that people employed by the government are doing in interacting with these companies, even if it's not, a law that passes through Congress. That has changed what these language models will look like, and to my opinion, to a very, very detrimental level. And in fact, according to some objective evaluations, it also makes it worse at answering factual questions, right?
Mm,
As you might expect from someone or something of that ideology. So
mm,
that's number two, is kind of traditional political interests. And third is the crackdown on hardware, which I think that is
mm.
less kind of quite frankly, has less implications on the kind of broader freedoms that normal Americans have, right? That is more of a kind of economic central planning thing, uh, but less of a kind of abolishment of the First Amendment, but is something where it will have significant economic consequences. Like you look at the kind of slowdowns caused by cost restraints in an open market, right? That'll be nothing compared to if a crackdown on hardware happens and this becomes something that is heavily restricted and controlled by the federal government.
Yeah. Let me ask you a basic question. So open source binding open source model is the ChatGPT, is the model open source?
No,
No, no.
it's very funny. Many people, most famously Elon, have complained about this. There's this. I think he had this tweet that like, "Oh, you should change your name to closed AI," and he's
Mm,
kind of right.
yeah.
ChatGPT is not an open source model. You'll never, or I don't know about never, but right now you can't read the code online. This is something. This is as opposed to something like Llama, where the code and weight is online. You can basically download it and use it, right? You can use it and you can modify it using normal machine learning techniques and so on and so forth. That's what people mean by open source.
And the role of hardware, if I had OpenAI's um, algorithm, I would not be able to run it on a normal computer. Would I need a super something computer?
So essentially, there's two, or there's kind of yeah, there's kind of two phases to this, right? There's training and there's inference. So the advantage of a lot of open source models where their weights are released is that the weights are kind of the product of this first training process. And the first training process is immensely expensive.
Hmm.
Uh, it's the main barrier for most startups, and uh, one of the reasons why why Nvidia stock price is so high,
And
why there's so much profit in hardware right now.
is that just like having the predictions, like having a matrix of predictions? Is that what all that is?
It's not quite a matrix of predictions. It's a
Hmm.
matrix of essentially that directs how input is processed through the network.
Hmm.
Um, I really don't like the analogies that most people use to this. So I'm just going to try to explain it best I can on the kind of
Yeah.
real level. Essentially, each of these machine learning models require something to compare their like progress to, right? To judge how effectively uh, uh, they are uh, they are predicting the next token, essentially how effectively they're giving an answer, and to improve itself if they're not doing very well. That's why the training process happens. So the training process happens. The training process consists of taking all of this data that you hear about like kind of going in to the LLM, right? And essentially taking a batch of it, passing it through the LLM, so running the LLM on it, see what it outputs, and kind of measuring the difference between what you thought it would output and what it actually did output, and then kind of using a technique called back propagation, update the network. Excuse me. Update the network so that it better predicts the next token, so that it better matches the input text. So this is a massive amount of data, and in order to process all of that data, a massive amount of operations as well. And
So the
this is an
operations
incredibly
requires
intensive
it
process.
requires a lot of hardware to do the operations, or just
Yeah.
to make the original thing. Okay, so if the so the so if what I'm getting at is if the open AI code was fully available, but the government seized all hardware, we would not be able to have ChatGPT.
Yeah. So there are ways to make it more. You can run models. You can run what people call inference, which is basically asking it to answer a new question, without actually updating the model itself. You can run that on sort of normal hardware,
Oh, so
right?
I could run today's ChatGPT, but I can't update it.
It's a matter of quantity, not quality. Theoretically, you could gather enough like normal CPUs and run the algorithm on it, right? Both either training or
Okay.
inference,
So
but
I
it's
just
just
have to
much
buy
less
enough.
efficient.
I just have to buy enough computers. So once the code is out there, what I'm getting at is once the code is out there, um, is making code open source like a defense against government takeover
Yeah,
because
absolutely, absolutely.
and so you can so if one day somebody gets the tragedy would be somebody takes over open AI and like destroys the code, right? If somebody has the code out there, we'd at least have ChatGPT up to the level of 2024 and we could run it and we could have the technology, and this applies to other things
Yeah.
too, right? They could
Or
stop
there's a
hardware.
slight caveat to that,
uh,
which is that when most people say the code, they just mean the underlying algorithm, not necessarily the results of the training. So the results of the training, the kind of configuration of each of the numbers in this data or in this model, sorry, is usually called the weights, right? So the
hmm,
weights are the results of running the code on all of the training data and then updating the network, right? Updating the weights. The
hmm,
weights are what um, allows, or the weights are the thing that is updated to make a machine learning model better predict the output.
yeah. So yes, but so we can. So it sounds like we can have. There are steps we could take to at least protect what we have so far. You have an algorithm. It's just a bunch of
Yeah, yeah.
code.
Releasing the algorithm and the weights, that would be, that would be a coup de grace. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, and then you would need hard, and the government could come down on hardware and try to destroy progress, which you would need for that. Not only on that one, but on potentially other um, kinds of technology, other kinds of models and ways
Yeah,
to
yeah.
get intelligence. Yeah.
So the specialized, yeah. The problem that you could see is that as specialized hardware becomes more and more efficient compared to normal hardware. A normal CPU, which it already is, right? It's already much more efficient than a normal CPU for basically technical reasons of the ability to run more of a simple process in parallel, basically. Um, and and models kind of update themselves. The way people run models kind of changes to reflect that. Then they do become very difficult to run locally. Now there are some experiments with existing open source models that allow you to run them on a kind of normal Apple chip or a kind of normal Windows processor, or so not Windows, a normal kind of Microsoft processor, right, or an Intel processor, and uh, gets okay results. Usually, there's some decrease in performance, but yeah, it's a matter of marginal cost, right? It's a matter of uh, if you take this section of high performing hardware out of the market, there's always going to be, well, not always, I guess, but there will be substitutes in any kind of realistic scenario of this happening.
Yeah.
And
So
those substitutes might be less efficient, but the marginal cost of having more LLMs running increases, or the marginal value of having more LLMs running increases, so people will use the existing hardware to run the LLMs.
yeah. So let's shift to the things you're actually most excited about with AI. Is there something that people are missing that it's going to be able to do besides create porn, answer questions, tutor kids, make movies? People have thought about all that stuff. Well, what do you see as sort of the benefit here?
Yeah, accelerating software writing. I think that, like, this is very funny. It kind of goes to kind of nostalgia factor in me. So maybe this is just my personal bias, but like a lot of writing code is like boilerplate. Like you have a few ideas. There's a few things that you do to kind of direct those ideas that kind of expresses what you want to get done, and then there is a lot of boilerplate. And this is something that levels of AI can do, right? Copilot, ChatGPT to some level. I had a front end bug in the Alliance for the Future website, and then I corrected it. And I remember messaging the internal organization saying, guess how I fixed the front end bug, and of course it was with GPT-4. So this is something that I'm already very excited for. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Something that this is less this is not really a kind of out of left field take, but biotechnology I'm very excited for. I think like that's always something where people put a lot of hope in, because the kind of payoff of having healthier, longer lives, or curing these dangerous diseases or other problems that people might have. These are things that uh, are very are very heartwarming for good reason. Here I don't really like. I don't think the emotion is a bad thing. It's correct.
Yeah. So cool. Okay. So exciting. So you're yeah. The upshot here is don't be like nuclear power. Don't
Yeah,
destroy.
exactly. The
Is-
NRC, NEPA, we have precedents for where this
yeah.
happened, right? And for some kind of specific reasons, right? Mostly because software is speech. It's harder, but that will not stop people from trying, as you very well know. And,
Yeah.
and this is something I want to emphasize, that what we saw with Google and what we saw with Gemini is a kind of sublegal coordination, right? That the government will say, here are things that we recommend, and if you don't follow our recommendations, we maybe won't directly say that's why we're retaliating, but you
Yeah.
see what's happening with Musk, you see what's happening with um, a lot of these other companies. Go figure.
Is there any lever or any kind of pressure to make OpenAI release its algorithm? Is there anything going on as far as that? Are they still a
There's the
nonprofit
Musk
or
lawsuit.
yeah, he's trying to
but
sue them.
not really. It's a private company, and I do think like there is going too far when it comes to like I am a huge supporter of open source. I think that the people working on open source are doing God's work. But at the end of the day, like if someone doesn't want to open source their weights, then they
Yeah.
don't want to open source
But
their
I mean there's
weights.
yeah, but it seems like this knowledge is out there, right? I mean like how close are other models to ChatGPT? It seems like a lot of people can do this perhaps or they're close to it.
Yeah, it depends on the benchmark.
Hmm.
So I would say that yeah, Mistral is already kind of better than GPT-3 ish, I would say, on most
Yeah.
benchmarks. And there's as you can
Yeah.
imagine, there's a lot of like
Yeah.
um,
So the cat's
dispute
out.
over this,
Yeah,
because
the
each
cat's out the bag at least for um uh basic
or no, that's not the
ChatGPT.
point I was going to make. I
Yeah.
agree with that point, but the point I was going to make is that all these companies want to like exaggerate the benchmarks in their favor, right? They want to pretend like their model. They want to focus on the things that they're best at and kind of brush the things that they're worst at under the rug. So it is kind of hard to settle on what benchmark is the best for comparing these. But I would say that Mistral is not, from a kind of holistic level. I would say that Mistral is not that many generations behind, and they're probably the leading open source model on a lot of these benchmarks that I'm seeing. And what else I would say is, returning to the other point, yeah, machine learning. A lot of these techniques are published out in the open, right? Everyone, you can all read the Transformer paper on Arciv. And a lot of this data is kind of already out there. Some people are saying that in the longer term or even in the medium term, Meta might have an advantage or Google might have an advantage because they have their own databases, right? And that might be true for some more kind of specific tasks, right? There's kind of
Yeah.
AlphaFold, which is the protein folding task. So that's true in some specific areas. But in terms of language models, that's less the case because there's just so much text. Um, so yeah, I think that competition is alive and well. I welcome it. I don't agree with Teal that like competition is bad. Right. I want to see it. I want to see all of these guys succeed.
Excellent. So yeah, so what can people do to reach you? How can they help? Just plug Alliance for the
Yeah,
Future.
it's unfortunate. I was kind of excited to talk about kind of political strategy, because you know a lot about this. Especially about the legal pathways, and we both are interested in public choice and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's unfortunate. The best way to help is by donating. affuture.org/donate. And you can also reach out to me at Chau at affuture.org. And both of those links, I mean, it's the same website, have two F's. This is a problem that we've run into. It's AF Future, future with a second F, uh,
Right, Florida.
other than the AF that came before it. And you can see a lot of our materials there. We feature a lot of articles, including people like Tyler Cowen, Mark Andreessen, Tim Lee, and yeah, we're very excited for any kind of comment that you might have
Hey, so
that you
is
can
this
let
like a
me know.
blog? You have Andreessen and Tyler and these other people there?
Yeah, so this is it's a selection of essays or articles from other sites.
Gotcha.
So we have kind of summaries, and then we link back to the original.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, it's like a cream of the crop of what we want to
Yeah.
highlight in the community.
Yeah. Well, this one was, I mean, we can go back to the political stuff another time. We could have another conversation. I think just talking about AI and alignment
Yeah, for
and
sure. This
was,
this will be my, this will be the podcast I link to when it comes to like, my unfiltered takes on the doomers. Because for a while, look, I'm still friends with a lot of EAs. I
yeah.
still agree with them on like drug acceleration. It's funny because they're all like they're accelerationists on drugs, they're accelerationists on like
Yeah.
YIMBY, on like building new stuff. I
Yeah.
miss that EA. You guys should like come back, and I still know some people who work on those issues, but like EA more broadly, get back to your roots. Be more optimistic about the world. Look
Yeah.
at like the dumb shit politicians get up to, and like start being angry about that instead.
Yeah. Have you talked
That's
to
the EA I miss.
have you met a laser?
No, I don't think so.
Hmm.
There's some event. There was some like SF party that like supposedly he was at, but I didn't see him there.
And you were at, okay. Yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk. We were both at the Manifest conference last year, but yeah, okay. I was just curious because you were talking about your
Yeah,
relationships
I'm
with the.
probably nothing's finalized yet, but I'll probably be at Manifest this year, so it'll be interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe hopefully I'll be there too. Okay, Brian, it's been great. Until next time, we'll put
Yeah,
all the
this was
links, of
fun.
course. Yeah, we'll put all the links, of course, in the show notes so people can find them there. Okay, bye, Brian.
See ya.